I never expected a quiet Tuesday night to end with me standing barefoot in my driveway, staring at the burning skeleton of the house I had lived in for 12 years. The flames were so bright they painted the entire street orange, and neighbors gathered at a distance, whispering while pretending to look concerned. I could barely hear the firefighters shouting over the roar of the blaze, and all I could think about was how fast everything I owned had turned to smoke. The smell of charred wood and melted plastic clung to the air, thick and nauseating, sinking into my clothes and my skin. What I couldn't understand was how the fire had spread so quickly. The investigators moved around with flashlights, speaking in low, serious tones that didn't match the idea of an accidental fire. 4 months before the fire, Karen from the HOA had been waging her own strange war against me. She complained about my fence, my shed, my truck, and even the color of the gravel in my side yard. Every time she showed up, she carried her clipboard like a badge of authority, scribbling fines and violations with the enthusiasm of someone who enjoyed controlling other people. I ignored most of it, believing she would eventually get tired of bothering me, but she only became more aggressive. The week before the fire, she confronted me in front of the entire HOA board, accusing me of lowering property values and claiming she would handle the situation personally. I remember the room going quiet, everyone waiting to see if she would back down, but she didn't. When my neighbor later showed me his doorbell camera footage of her creeping toward my porch with a gas can, everything clicked at once. My house wasn't lost to an accident. It was destroyed on purpose. In that moment, I realized my life had been shattered by someone who should never have had power. The morning after the fire, the investigators returned with more questions, and I could tell by the way they approached me that things had escalated. One of them, a tall man with soot still smudged on his uniform, asked if I had any conflicts with neighbors. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but I mentioned Karen's threats. His eyebrows rose slightly, as if he'd already suspected something similar. They collected samples from the ashes, took photos of the charred remains of my porch, and marked spots where traces of accelerant had been found. Every new detail made the reality settle deeper into my chest. Someone had planned this. Someone had walked onto my property and set fire to the place where I had built memories, hosted holidays, and felt safe. By noon, the footage from my neighbor's doorbell camera was in the hands of the police. The grainy video showed Karen's distinctive walk, her bright floral jacket, and the unmistakable outline of a gas can swinging from her hand. She looked over her shoulder twice before disappearing behind my hedges. That was all the investigators needed to bring her in for questioning. News spread fast, and by evening the entire neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Some people pretended to be shocked, while others admitted they weren't surprised at all. Karen had ruled the HOA with an iron fist for years, handing out fines like candy and threatening lawsuits over lawn ornaments. But no one imagined she'd take things this far. When officers finally arrived at her house, she tried to act confused, insisting she had no reason to harm a resident, yet the evidence spoke for itself. Watching her being escorted into the patrol car should have made me feel vindicated, but instead it left an emptiness I didn't expect. My home was gone, my belongings lost, and the person responsible was someone I had once considered merely annoying. Now she wasn't just a nuisance. She was facing arson charges. The days leading up to Karen's hearing felt strangely quiet, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. I spent most of my time meeting with insurance adjusters, answering calls from investigators, and trying to piece together what was left of my life. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the flames crawling up the walls of my living room, swallowing the photographs I never got to save. Friends told me to focus on justice, but justice didn't replace memories. It didn't rebuild walls. It didn't make the nights feel any less hollow. When the prosecutor called to tell me I'd need to testify, I felt a knot twist in my stomach. Facing Karen directly was the last thing I wanted, but avoiding her wouldn't undo anything. The trial preparation was intense. They walked me through the timeline, the evidence, and the likely arguments her lawyer would use. Apparently, Karen planned to plead a stress-related temporary loss of judgment, claiming she never intended to cause so much damage. The idea that she thought she could burn down a house and get sympathy made my blood boil. The court date arrived on a cold morning. I walked into the courthouse wearing borrowed clothes, feeling out of place and exposed. When I stepped inside the courtroom, I expected to see Karen sitting quietly, maybe remorseful. Instead, she glared at me as if I had ruined her life. Her hair was pulled tightly back, her expression sharp, and she whispered angrily to her attorney. Even in handcuffs, she carried herself like she still ran the neighborhood. When I took the stand, Karen scoffed under her breath, rolling her eyes as if the entire trial was an inconvenience. Yet as the video footage played and the prosecutor described every intentional act, I saw her confidence crack for the first time. For a moment, she looked genuinely afraid. And that was when I realized we were nowhere near the end of this fight. Karen's sentencing hearing drew an unexpected crowd. Neighbors who had once avoided choosing sides now filled the benches, whispering among themselves as if attending a community spectacle instead of a criminal proceeding. I took my seat near the front, feeling the weight of every stare. Part of me wanted to disappear, but another part wanted them all to see exactly what Karen had done. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Karen was led in moments later, wearing the same cold expression she had worn during the trial, as if none of this applied to her. The prosecutor summarized the evidence once more: accelerant traces, burn patterns, video footage, and Karen's threatening messages. Her attorney tried to argue she had been overwhelmed by stress, claiming she acted out of emotional instability rather than malice. The judge didn't look convinced. When it was time for victim statements, I stood slowly, my palms sweating. I spoke about losing my home, the irreplaceable items, the sleepless nights, and the fear that someone I barely interacted with felt entitled to destroy everything I owned. Karen refused to look at me. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, as if my words were nothing more than background noise. When the judge asked Karen if she wished to speak, she stood and delivered a bizarre, half-hearted apology that dissolved into a rant about the HOA, property standards, and community responsibility. She even suggested I had forced her hand by ignoring repeated warnings. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Her attorney buried his face in his hands. The judge quickly shut her down, stating her lack of remorse was deeply concerning. Then came the moment everyone waited for: sentencing. As the judge read out the years she would serve, Karen's composure finally cracked. Her face drained of color, and for the first time, she looked small. The courtroom remained silent as the bailiff stepped forward, and I realized the power she once held over me had. In the weeks after Karen was taken into custody, the neighborhood seemed to transform overnight. People who once avoided me at HOA meetings now stopped to talk, offering awkward apologies in casseroles I didn't have a kitchen to heat. The HOA board held an emergency meeting to fill her position, and for the first time in years, residents spoke freely without fear of being fined for trivial things. It was strange seeing the community slowly untangle itself from the grip Karen had held for so long. Even so, I still felt detached from everything. My house was gone, my yard a fenced-off pile of rubble waiting for clearance, and my routine shattered beyond recognition. The insurance company eventually approved my claim, and reconstruction plans were set in motion. I met with contractors, picked new materials, and tried to focus on rebuilding, but every decision reminded me of what I had lost. Late at night, I found myself replaying the trial in my head: Karen's rant, the judge's stern voice, the final sentence echoing through the courtroom. Yet, despite everything she had done, part of me struggled to understand how a person could let something as insignificant as HOA power push them into destroying another person's life. One afternoon, while sorting through the few belongings recovered from the debris, I found a half-burned photo of my father and me standing in front of the old shed we built together. The edges were charred, but our faces were untouched. Holding it made something shift inside me. Maybe the fire had destroyed my house, but it hadn't erased the memories or the reasons to rebuild. When construction finally began, neighbors volunteered to help clear debris, haul materials, and plant new trees. Standing on the freshly poured foundation, I felt something I hadn't felt since the fire: a sense of forward motion. Karen was gone, justice was served, and the community was finally healing. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't standing in the RU.